When Marcus Webb was fired after 22 years, every executive inside Colton and Rowe Financial Group had the same terrifying thought. What if he talked? Because Marcus Webb knew everything. He knew which reports had been buried. He knew which signatures should never have appeared on certain documents. He knew which compliance failures had quietly disappeared before regulators could find them. He knew where the bodies were buried, not literal bodies, corporate ones. And for 22 years, he had protected people who barely remembered his birthday. Then one Tuesday morning, without warning, without dignity, without even the courtesy of a conversation, they erased him with a 4-line email. What happened next would force an entire institution to confront something powerful people spend their lives trying to avoid: the truth. But this story is not really about finance, or corruption, or investigations. It is about something far more dangerous: the quiet people. The ones nobody notices until the day everything starts falling apart. Before we continue, welcome to the Unspoken chapter, where every silence eventually asks to be heard. If stories about dignity, betrayal, human character, and hidden strength speak to something inside you, subscribe now, because by the end of this story, you may never look at the quietest person in the room the same way again. Now, let's go back. Marcus Webb was 51 years old, not old enough to disappear, not young enough to start over comfortably. He had spent most of his adult life inside the gray, steel and glass tower of Colton and Rowe Financial Group in London. 22 years. Long enough to watch entire departments rise and vanish. Long enough to see ambitious graduates become exhausted managers. Long enough to understand something most people never learn about institutions. Organizations rarely reward the people protecting them. They reward the people performing importance. Marcus understood this early, and because he understood it, he stopped chasing recognition years ago. His official title was Chief Operations Analyst, which sounded impressive enough on paper. But inside the building, it really meant something else. Marcus Webb was the man who quietly fixed disasters before anybody important had to answer for them. When a derivatives exposure in Singapore nearly created a multi-million-pound reporting catastrophe in 2017, Marcus stayed in the office for 36 straight hours rebuilding reconciliation systems nobody else fully understood. The board never learned his name. When a merger review uncovered hidden liabilities buried inside a partner firm's documentation, it was Marcus who noticed an inconsistency in paragraph 47 of a 200-page disclosure attachment at 11:19 on a Thursday night. One paragraph, one discrepancy, one quiet email. The merger collapsed 48 hours later. Executives congratulated themselves publicly for their diligence. Marcus ate microwave pasta at his desk and moved on. That was how his life worked. He prevented catastrophes that nobody ever realized had existed. And because disasters never happened, people assumed they would never have happened anyway. That is the curse of competent people. Success erases evidence of the work required to create it. Marcus wore the same charcoal gray coat for nearly a decade, not because he could not afford another one, because he genuinely did not care. He arrived 14 minutes earlier than everyone else every morning. Not 15, 14. Enough time to review overnight updates, scan overnight regulatory notices, and prepare for the chaos other people would eventually create. He knew every cleaner's name in the building, every security guard, every maintenance worker. But half the executives above him barely noticed when he entered a room. And strangely, Marcus preferred it that way. There is freedom in being underestimated. The less attention people pay to you, the more honestly they behave in front of you. Marcus learned that too. Outside work, his world was remarkably small. A modest brick house in Bristol, a neglected garden, a kettle that whistled too loudly, stacks of financial journals, and Ray, his daughter, 23 years old, sharp-minded, studying law in London. Ray had inherited Marcus's intelligence, but not his silence. She challenged things, questioned things, refused to accept authority simply because it existed. Marcus admired that about her, even when it exhausted him. "Dad," she once told him during university holidays, "you spend your entire life helping people who would replace you in 5 minutes." Marcus smiled slightly. "Most people are replaceable, Ray." "No," she said. "Most people are treated like they are." He remembered that conversation often, especially later, because sometimes the people who love us see truths we are not ready to face. The email arrived at 7:52 on a Tuesday morning in November. Marcus was already at his desk. Of course he was. Rain streaked softly against the windows. The office lights still carried that dim, early morning artificial glow buildings have before human noise fully enters them. He was reviewing overnight audit revisions when the notification appeared. Subject line, restructure, confidential. Marcus opened it, then read it again, then a third time, because sometimes the brain rejects reality before accepting it. The message was short, clinical, polished. His role had been eliminated effective immediately. No discussion, no transition meeting, no acknowledgement of 22 years, just four carefully sanitized paragraphs written by somebody from Human Resources who had probably never spoken to him. He was offered 60 days severance. 60 days for 22 years. Marcus sat completely still, not angry, not emotional, just still. The office slowly came alive around him. Elevators opened, coffee machines hissed, conversations started, phones rang. Nobody approached his desk, and that, more than the email itself, was what he remembered later. The silence. Because everybody knew. They knew Marcus Webb understood things that could destroy careers. He knew about offshore structures that existed in legal gray zones. He knew which internal audit findings had quietly disappeared before board review. He knew about compliance failures regulators never officially discovered. He knew enough to burn the entire company down. And the people who had eliminated his position knew that too. Here is the extraordinary part. They were not afraid he would expose them because they trusted the system. They were afraid because they trusted Marcus. They were betting everything on one belief, that Marcus Webb was fundamentally decent, that even after humiliation, he would still choose restraint. And they were right. That was the cruelest part, because decent people often become prisons for themselves. Marcus packed his desk quietly. No dramatic speeches, no emotional confrontation, no bitterness. He placed folders into a cardboard box, collected his umbrella, turned off the small desk lamp he had personally purchased 8 years earlier because the office lighting gave him headaches. Then he left. 22 years, reduced to a cardboard box and an elevator ride. Outside, London moved normally. That bothered him more than anything. Traffic continued, people laughed, buses passed, coffee shops opened. The world did not pause simply because one man's life had quietly cracked open. Marcus took the train home. That evening, he sat alone in his overgrown garden while cold November wind moved through weeds he had spent years promising himself he would eventually handle. 3 hours passed. At some point, the tea beside him went cold. And somewhere between the second and third hour, Marcus made a decision, not to destroy them, but not to disappear either. 6 weeks later, Marcus Webb received a phone call from a woman named Dominique Ferrara. He almost ignored it. Unknown numbers had become exhausting since his termination. Recruiters, consultants, awkward sympathy calls from former colleagues pretending to care. But something about the voicemail made him pause. The voice was calm, measured, precise. Mr. Webb, my name is Dominique Ferrara from Oberlin Risk Advisory. I believe we should speak. Please call me back when convenient. No artificial warmth, no corporate enthusiasm, no manipulation, just certainty. Marcus waited 3 days before returning the call, not because he needed time, because 22 years around reckless executives had taught him something valuable. People who move too quickly usually miss important things. They met near Waterloo Station at a quiet cafe designed for business conversations nobody wanted overheard. Dominique Ferrara was 45, elegant without trying to appear elegant, sharp-eyed, still. Marcus noticed immediately that she listened completely when people spoke. Very few powerful people do that. Most only wait for their turn to speak again. She slid a single page across the table. We have a client facing regulatory review, she said. Marcus read the institution's name, then looked up slowly. Because the institution currently under investigation was being examined for compliance failures almost identical to the ones Marcus had quietly corrected at Colton and Rowe for years. We need an operational forensic review, Dominique continued, 34 days before findings of publication. Marcus said nothing. We approached 11 people before you. Why didn't you hire them? We interviewed them. That wasn't my question. For the first time, Dominique smiled faintly. No, she admitted. It wasn't. Marcus folded his hands. Why me? Dominique held his gaze. Because every reference described you the same way. He waited. The one person in the building trusted with things nobody else could afford to lose. Silence settled between them. Outside, commuters moved through rain-slicked streets, unaware that an exhausted man in a worn gray coat was being offered the opportunity to reshape powerful futures. Marcus finally asked, "What exactly do you need?" "The truth," Dominique said. Most people would assume that answer sounded noble. Marcus knew better. Truth becomes expensive when powerful people are attached to consequences. "I work alone," Marcus said. "Fine. I require unrestricted document access." "Agreed. And if findings implicate senior leadership, I do not soften reports to protect reputations." Dominique nodded once. "That is precisely why we called you." Marcus stared at the paper, then folded it carefully in half. "I'll start Monday." The institution's records were not dramatically corrupt, which made them more dangerous. Real institutional collapse rarely arrives like explosions in films. It arrives through small, tolerated compromises, tiny shortcuts, quiet procedural dishonesty repeated long enough to become culture. A compliance form approved late, a risk sign-off completed by someone without proper authority, an escalation memo quietly downgraded to informational. Nothing individually catastrophic. Together, potentially devastating. Marcus approached the work the same way he approached everything, methodically, emotionally detached, carefully. Each morning he arrived before sunrise. Each night he left after security rounds. He ate lunch at his desk, learned cleaners' names within days, avoided gossip, avoided alliances, avoided politics. He simply worked. People often misunderstand disciplined individuals. They assume restraint means lack of emotion. Usually it means the opposite. Marcus felt everything deeply. He simply learned long ago that emotional reactions cloud pattern recognition, and patterns were what he saw best. Within 2 weeks, he identified systemic concealment, not chaotic incompetence, not isolated negligence. A culture, one built on protecting appearances over integrity. Then on day 19, Marcus found something nobody expected him to find, an attachment. Inside an archived email thread, inside a forgotten subfolder labeled Correspondence Miscellaneous 2021. The kind of folder people create when they hope information disappears quietly. Marcus opened the document. 11 pages. An internal legal opinion commissioned years earlier by the institution's own general counsel. The conclusion was devastating. Senior leadership had been formally warned their practices violated compliance standards. Not suspected, not vaguely questioned, warned in writing. And they continued anyway. Marcus finished reading, then slowly closed the laptop. For a long time, he stood beside the office window, looking down at the city below. Because he understood instantly what this document meant. The investigation was no longer about procedural failure. It was about deliberate concealment. And once intent enters the equation, consequences change. Careers end. Reputations collapse. People go to prison. Marcus called Dominique. "I need a meeting tomorrow." "What happened?" 9 o'clock, Marcus said. Then he ended the call. Afterward, he sat alone in the silent office. And for the first time since his termination, he allowed himself to feel anger. Not explosive anger. Not revenge. Something quieter. The bitter irony of realizing that the exact skills his previous employers discarded were now the only reason this investigation might survive honestly. 22 years. 22 years of invisible labor. And suddenly everything he quietly carried mattered. The meeting room felt colder than necessary. 7 people attended. Dominique, 2 Oberlin partners, 3 senior institutional representatives, and Marcus. Marcus placed the printed document on the table. Nobody touched it immediately. One executive, a silver-haired man with the exhausted composure of someone who had survived decades inside powerful institutions, finally spoke. "Where did you find this?" Marcus explained. Silence. The executive adjusted his glasses. This document creates significant complications. Marcus said nothing. If included in the formal remediation report, the sentence remained unfinished. It did not need finishing. Everybody understood. Inclusion would escalate the investigation dramatically. The room carried the heavy stillness of people calculating damage in real time. Then came the sentence Marcus had heard in different forms his entire professional life. I'm asking Mr. Webb to consider the broader impact. Consider the impact. Such elegant language. So civilized. And almost always used when powerful people want morality adjusted for convenience. Marcus looked around the room. He thought about junior analysts whose mistakes he corrected quietly to protect them. He thought about late nights, buried reports, ignored warnings, the 4-line email ending 22 years. Then he looked back at the executive. The document remains in the report, Marcus said. The room became still. The executive leaned forward. You understand what this may trigger? Yes. There will be consequences. There should be. The executive's expression hardened. You are speaking theoretically. People's lives may be destroyed. Marcus held his gaze calmly. No, he said softly. They were destroyed when leadership knowingly allowed misconduct to continue. The investigation is simply where consequences finally arrive. Silence. Marcus continued. The people most harmed by institutional dishonesty are rarely the executives making decisions. They are junior employees, clients, auditors ignored for doing their jobs properly, ordinary people who trusted systems they never controlled. Nobody interrupted him. They do not get invited into rooms like this to consider the broader impact. They simply live with it. Then Marcus closed the folder. The document stays. And for the first time in many years, Marcus Webb felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not satisfaction, alignment. The quiet relief of finally standing completely beside his own conscience. The report was submitted 3 days early, 48 pages, precise, documented, unsparing, no emotional language, no theatrical accusations, just facts. And facts, when arranged honestly, can become more devastating than outrage. Within 2 weeks, 2 senior executives were placed on leave. Formal inquiries expanded. Regulators escalated proceedings. Media speculation intensified. Inside financial circles, people quietly began asking the same question. Who wrote the report? Marcus ignored all of it. He returned home each evening, watered a dying plant Ray once gave him, and slowly began clearing the garden he had neglected for years. Because after decades inside institutional chaos, small, honest tasks felt sacred. One morning, Dominique called. The partners want to offer you a permanent role. Marcus stood near the kitchen window while rain touched the glass. Senior advisory position, she continued. Full autonomy, selective case authority, compensation significantly above your previous package. Marcus looked outside at the garden. The uneven soil, the weeds, the half-repaired bench. I'll think about it, he said. Dominique laughed softly. You already know your answer. Yes, Marcus admitted. But after spending 22 years around people who rush decisions, I prefer taking my time. 3 days later, he accepted. Not because of the salary, not because of prestige, because for the first time in his professional life, his integrity was not being treated as an inconvenience. That weekend, Ray visited from London. She arrived carrying takeaway coffee and a plant somebody had apparently promised was impossible to kill. Which means you'll absolutely manage to kill it, she told her father. Marcus almost smiled. They sat in the garden together while cold November air drifted through overgrown hedges. For a while, neither spoke. Marcus loved that about Ray. She understood silence. Not everybody does. Most people panic around silence. They rush to fill it, cover it, escape it. But silence is where truth usually lives. Are you all right? Ray finally asked. Marcus looked around the garden. I think I forgot there are parts of life that matter outside work, he said. Ray studied him carefully. That sounds dangerously close to wisdom. Marcus gave the smallest laugh. Then he stood, walked toward the nearest flower bed, and began pulling weeds with his bare hands. Dad, Ray said. Marcus kept working. It's November. He glanced up. Doesn't mean it doesn't need doing. Ray watched him quietly for a moment, then placed both coffees on the bench, walked beside him and knelt in the cold soil. Together, father and daughter worked silently in the fading afternoon light. No speeches, no dramatic healing, just two people repairing something neglected, which in the end was what Marcus had done his entire life. Now I want to speak to you directly, because this story was never really about finance. It was about human nature, and if you listen carefully, you will realize Marcus Webb exists everywhere. In offices, families, communities, friendships, quiet people holding broken systems together, while louder people take credit for stability they did not create. The first lesson is this: the most valuable person in any organization is rarely the loudest. Usually it is the person quietly preventing disasters nobody else even notices. The one who catches the mistake, the one who stays late, the one who protects the team without announcing it, the one who carries responsibility without demanding applause. These people exist everywhere, and most organizations do not recognize their value until they are gone. If you manage people, learn to notice them before crisis teaches you their importance. And if you are one of them, understand something clearly. Your quietness is not weakness. The second lesson: there is a profound difference between being harmless and being disciplined. Marcus Webb had enough information to destroy lives. He chose not to, not because he lacked power, because he possessed character. Anybody can become destructive when wounded. Real strength is having the ability to cause damage and still choosing integrity. That kind of restraint rarely receives applause, but it is one of the highest forms of human maturity. The third lesson: integrity is rarely tested through dramatic moments. Most moral decisions arrive quietly. A document hidden inside a forgotten folder, a sentence left unfinished across a conference table, a polite request to compromise for the greater good. Those are the moments revealing who we actually are. Not public speeches, not social media declarations, private decisions, quiet choices, invisible honesty. And the final lesson: loyalty that goes unrecognized is not wasted. It becomes character. Marcus lost his position, his routine, 22 years of invisible investment. But he did not lose himself. And when powerful institutions desperately needed somebody who could not be manipulated, pressured, or purchased, they called the quiet man they once ignored. Not despite who he was, because of it. This has been the Unspoken chapter, where every silence eventually asks to be heard. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone carrying invisible weight. And tell me in the comments, have you ever quietly done the right thing, even when nobody noticed? Or have you ever realized too late that the quietest person in the room was the one holding everything together? I read every story, and if you have not subscribed yet, now is the time, because the next chapter may feel uncomfortably familiar too. Until next time, stay honest where it matters. Stay steady when integrity becomes expensive. And remember, the world rarely applauds the people holding it together, but eventually, it always needs them. See you in the next chapter.